The sky tore open like a wound, bleeding fire across the ice-blind heavens of Tarnis 4. Garen Morn stood still against the howling wind, his breath turning to frost in the shadows of a dead calm's spire. The burning trail carved through the clouds above him, a dying vessel plummeting toward the frozen crust of the moon like a broken sword hurled by some angry god. He didn't move. Not yet. It wasn't the first time something had fallen from the sky here. But this one felt different. Again, he thought. Too soon. His hand drifted to the pulse pistol holstered beneath his coat, fingers brushing the worn leather grip. Wreckage was nothing new on Tarnis 4. Half the damn moon was a graveyard of lost ships and forgotten wars. But this wasn't the fall of a scavenger drone or a rogue cargo pod. This ship was alive as it fell. Someone was trying to land it, trying to hold the line between survival and oblivion. That someone might be dangerous, or might already be dead. The wind screamed, dragging the scent of ozone and scorched alloy across the ice. Garen turned, boots crunching in the snow, his silhouette a dark slash against the pale horizon. The trail of smoke was drawing him west, toward the deeper ice fields, toward the place where the moon had once opened its belly to miners and exiles, long before it was swallowed by silence and snow. He moved quickly, knees aching, heart heavy. Each step brought an echo of the past, gunfire and jungle fog, a child's scream, blood on metal. He shoved it all back into the place he kept it. Tarnis the Fourth didn't allow ghosts. It had too many of its own. Still, his thoughts turned dark as the wreckage drew nearer, saving someone, again. What the hell are you doing, Morn? 1,000 times he'd told himself, never again. Let the galaxy sort out its own disasters. He'd done his part, and he'd paid in blood. But the body in the snow, the fire in the sky, it was a call his muscles answered before his mind caught up. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was that damned old instinct. The compulsion to pull people from the fire, even when the fire burned everything he touched. Or maybe, just maybe, he'd stopped believing there was a difference between him and the ghosts out here. He found the wreckage 30 meters down a broken ravine of glassy ice and jagged rock. The ship had hit hard, gouging a crater into the glacier and cracking open against a rock outcrop like a brittle shell. Scorch marks trailed behind it like a comet's tail. There was movement inside the wreck. At first, Garen thought it was the wind playing tricks. Then he saw her, a figure half draped over the edge of the ruptured hull, blood melting tiny rivulets into the snow beneath her. Not human. Her skin was a luminous blue, unnaturally still in the storm, marbled with what looked like bioreactive veins. Long fire-red hair spilled out around her like a banner dropped in defeat. What remained of her armor clung to her body in fractured plates, some of them flickering with dim pulses of failing energy. Burned wires trailed from a neural socket behind her neck, sparking once, then dying. He stopped just short of her reach, breath-catching. Virexi. The realization hit like a cold blade in the gut. He hadn't seen one in years, not since the war, not since Emberdown. And even then, never this close. She groaned, a low animal sound, and shifted slightly. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Silver white, inhuman and beautiful and burning with pain. She saw him. And in that second, Garen knew. She'd kill him if she could. Her hand scraped at the snow, searching for a weapon. There wasn't one. "I'm not here to finish you off," he said, voice steady but low. "Though you're doing a good job of that on your own." No response. Just the cold gleam of defiance and hatred buried beneath exhaustion. He crouched, hands raised. No sudden moves. He'd dealt with enough dying soldiers to know how easily they could become dangerous. "Look," he muttered, "I don't care what side you fought on. You crash on my moon. You get my rules. Rule 1. You bleed in my snow. I pull you out." Still no answer. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak, not in words. Her gaze locked onto his face, and something flickered there. Recognition? Regret? Then she slipped again, consciousness tearing like silk. He caught her before she collapsed entirely. Her body was cold, frighteningly so. She weighed more than she looked, muscle, cybernetic implants, maybe both. As he lifted her into his arms, her head lolled against his shoulder, and in that moment she whispered, not in any known language, but soft, fragmented syllables that tasted like memory. "Taverin, not again, not the children." The words hit him in the ribs, not just because they sounded like grief, but because they were too familiar. He'd heard that voice before, years ago, not hers, but one just like it, over a broken comm, screaming the names of the dead. Garen shook it off. No time for ghosts. He carried her through the wind, moving with mechanical precision across cracked terrain and shifting snow. The storm pressed in, shrieking through rusted skeletons of mining equipment and the long-dead towers of Outpost 7. He passed the skeletal remains of what had once been a logistics bay, now nothing more than a buried dome with jagged holes where the sky had clawed its way in. Back then, over 10,000 people had worked this moon. Now only scavengers, ghosts, and men like him called it home. And now, her. 15 minutes of silence, of breathing harsh and ragged, of weight and wind and memory. He reached his shelter, an old mining dome sealed with patchwork metal and lined with salvaged heat coils. Inside, the air was warm and dry, the hum of the generator low but steady. Garen lowered her onto the padded cot and began stripping the broken armor from her frame. She moaned once, weakly, but didn't fight. The wound along her side was deep, half seared shut, half torn open. He worked with practiced hands, using scavenged med foam and sterile cloth to stop the bleeding. When her eyes opened again, they were clearer and furious. "You touched me," she rasped, voice guttural but sharp. "You were dying," he replied, not looking up. "And I'm not sorry," she glared at him. "You're human." He didn't flinch. "Never denied it." A pause. Then, as if the words burned on the way out, "I should have let the ice take me." Garen met her eyes then, really met them. "Yeah," he said softly. "I've thought that too." She blinked at that, confused, not used to being understood. He stood, tossing the bloodied cloth into a waste bin. "You need rest. There's heat, there's food, there's a roof. That's all I'm offering." When Kaylena woke again, it wasn't to pain. It was to warmth. Not the artificial hum of a controlled recovery pod or the sterile heat of a warship medbay. This was raw, uneven warmth, organic, alive. Something primitive in her body responded before her mind could name it. She flinched. Her eyes snapped open. Dim light, a curved ceiling, the rhythmic thrum of power coils beneath metal panels, snow-streaked walls cobbled together with salvaged hull plating, and the smell, faint, smoky, not unpleasant. Burnt synth fiber, stew, oil, not a Dominion cell, not a battlefield morgue, alive. Her breath hitched, shallow and instinctive. Her right hand curled toward her hip, toward where her weapon should have been, only to find a blanket and gauze instead. Her skin tingled where it had been cleaned. Her side ached, a dull, hot throb under a fresh bandage. She pushed herself upright slowly, wincing as her muscles screamed in protest. Across the room, the human sat on a rust-colored crate, turning a mug between his hands. No armor, no weapons in reach, just a simple thermocoat and those sharp, tired eyes that watched her without fear. He didn't speak, didn't move. His calmness made her skin prickle. Kaylena forced herself to breathe normally, calculate, assess. Her voice came rough, cracked. "How long?" He took a sip from the mug before answering. "About 6 hours." Her eyes swept the space again. No locks, no visible restraints. Only survival gear, a crude heater, patched vents. She glanced at the cot, then back at him. "Still your prisoner?" He let out a quiet, humorless sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "If I wanted a prisoner, I'd have locked the door." Another pause. Her gaze narrowed. "You should have." "I don't keep people in cages." She leaned back against the wall, eyes half-lidded but alert. "That's short-sighted." "Maybe," he said, "but I've done worse." That gave her pause. She didn't ask what. She didn't need to. Men who lived alone on dead moons rarely came clean. She shifted again, more carefully this time, and the weight of exhaustion pulled at her bones. Her limbs trembled, not from fear but from depletion. The kind of depletion that meant she'd gone days without food. That meant too much neural strain, too much blood loss. Her stomach growled, loudly. He stood and moved toward the galley alcove without a word. She didn't trust that. Movement could hide a dozen intentions, but her body was too weak to act. Still, her voice stayed sharp. "You touched me." "You were bleeding," he replied. Kaylena swallowed the snarl rising in her throat. She wasn't angry at the touch itself. She was angry that she hadn't had the strength to stop him, that she needed it, that it had, briefly, felt safe. He returned a moment later with a steaming bowl and a second mug. He set them both down on the floor beside her, then stepped back and crouched near the coil unit. "No poison," he added, almost casually. She stared at the bowl. It wasn't ration paste or military supplement. It was stew, real, uneven chunks of something that might have been protein floating in broth. It smelled almost savory. Her stomach twisted again. She didn't thank him. She picked up the bowl and brought it to her lips, hands trembling more than she liked. The first swallow burned slightly, but it grounded her. Real food, real heat, a real body processing sustenance after too long without it. Then she choked. A hard, involuntary gasp seized her throat and she coughed, spluttering. He was beside her in an instant, hand on her back. She froze. Muscle memory screamed, attack. Rip the hand away, roll and strike. But she didn't. His touch wasn't forceful, just present, steady. And when she looked up, half choking, there was no mockery in his face, no amusement, no fear, just a quiet concern that dug far deeper than it should have. Her eyes burned. She didn't want them to, but they did. Tears blurred her vision, hot and humbling. She turned away, swallowed again, harder this time. The silence stretched. "I've seen people come back from worse," he said finally, voice low. "But they always eat too fast. First bite's the hardest." Kaylena said nothing. She didn't trust herself to, but she kept eating, slower now, more careful. The warmth spread through her like medicine or maybe memory. She felt the hand leave her back, heard his footsteps retreat. The weight of his presence lingered longer. When she finished, she set the bowl down and sat in silence for a while, regaining her strength, trying to ignore the part of her that had felt something, not comfort, not yet, but a small fracture in the cold. "Name?" she asked after a long moment. The man leaned against a bulkhead, arms crossed. "Garen Morn." The name meant nothing to her, yet. She nodded once. "Kaylena." No house, no rank. The words tasted empty, but saying them made them real again. His brow lifted slightly. "No last name?" They burned it. That shut him up for a while. The heat coils hummed. Somewhere beneath them, the moon's crust groaned softly, ice shifting beneath metal, the world settling deeper into ruin. "Where are we?" she asked, voice quieter. "Tarnis 4, he said. "South Mining Zone. This used to be Outpost I-7. Used to be? 10,000 people lived here once. Miners, families, tech teams. Then came the war. The border redrew itself and nobody came back, except the drones, and people like me." Kaylena absorbed that. Her eyes drifted to the patched walls, the salvage tech, the care in each small detail. Not a scavenger, a survivor. She looked at him again, truly looked. Scar down his temple, streaks of gray at his hairline. Broad shoulders, but lean. A body built from work, not vanity. A man who'd fought once and no longer wanted to. "Why help me?" she asked. Garen stared at the floor for a moment, then, "Because I couldn't stop the last one." Kaylena didn't press. She knew that tone. It belonged to someone who lived with ghosts. Still, she felt something shift in her chest. She adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. It was too warm, too soft. And her body hated how much it wanted to melt into it. Her eyes started to close against her will. She opened them again. "Sleep," he said gently. "Not safe," she murmured, more to herself than him. "No," he agreed. "It's not." She expected him to promise otherwise. He didn't. That strangely made her believe him more. Kaylena slid down onto the cot, one hand still clenched loosely at her side, but her fingers had uncurled. Her eyes closed again, and this time they stayed closed. Garen watched her breathe, watched her chest rise and fall with slow, halting rhythm. Watched the tension fade from her jaw, molecule by molecule. He didn't understand what was happening here, why this woman had crashed on his moon, what she was running from, or why she looked at him like he was more threat than savior. But she hadn't killed him in his sleep, and that was a start. Not trust, but not nothing, not anymore. Kaylena stirred before the first light filtered through the battered ceiling plates. Garen heard her before he saw her, metal shifting softly, like an echo in a long-abandoned chamber. He kept still, feigning sleep, but his body had already tensed. She was moving again, faster than he expected. When he cracked an eye open, he found her upright, sitting at the edge of the cot, slowly tightening the makeshift brace he'd secured around her ribs. She moved with that same trained efficiency, every gesture deliberate, economic. Her long red hair, no longer matted with blood, had been hastily bound into a rough braid. Beneath the heavy coat she now wore, her body was still lean, still ready to fight. She didn't speak, just stood slowly and limped toward the sealed hatch. Garen shifted on his cot. Planning to limp your way out into a -40 wasteland? Kaylena didn't flinch, didn't even look at him. Just assessing, she replied flatly. I like to know which direction the wolves come from. You think I'm one of them? Not yet. Her voice was calm, but it hit like a blade dipped in frost. She ran her fingers lightly along the metal edges of the hatch, not pressing buttons, not trying to force it open, just feeling. Garen sat up fully now, watching her. You're not going to get far. Dome's buried past the 3rd tier. If you try climbing blind in your condition, the ridge will eat you alive. She didn't answer, but after a beat, her hand fell away from the wall. Her eyes shifted toward the distant window, a thin, scratched viewport half-frosted from last night's storm. The wind changed, she murmured. It smells different. Garen raised an eyebrow. You can smell through that? I trained to track movement through volcanic cloud banks. Tarnis's ice stench isn't that hard to read. He stood, stretching slowly, letting the stiffness fall from his limbs. You're fast on your feet for someone who was bleeding out 12 hours ago. I've been through worse. Yeah? He crossed the room to the terminal and keyed in a diagnostic sweep. You always crash on backwater moons and get dragged into shelters by strangers? No, she said. Usually I kill them first. He glanced over his shoulder. She wasn't joking, but there was no heat behind the words. Just muscle memory, the flat truth of someone who'd lived too long in hostile territory. Garen turned back to the panel. The scan showed external temperatures dropping again. Atmospheric movement was light, but one of the southward relay towers had gone dark, probably from ice accumulation. He'd have to repair it soon if he wanted the dome to stay powered through the week. Relay 9's out, he said. South sector. You're going out there? He nodded. Needs fixing. I'm coming. You're not healed. Kaylena looked at him, and this time her eyes narrowed. If something's watching this dome, it already saw the crash. Leaving me here alone is worse than dragging me out in the cold. He didn't argue. Her logic was sound. She wasn't looking for adventure. She was thinking tactically. Fine, he said. We leave in 20 minutes. Dress for it. She was already moving. Outside, the wind clawed at them, but lacked the teeth it had the night before. The sky was bone white, blank and endless, stretching across the ice fields like a lid pressed too tight. Garen led the way across the ridgeline, steps firm and practiced, Kaylena matching him half a pace behind. She walked without complaint, though her limp was noticeable. He checked her more than once, quiet glances to see how she carried herself. She never asked for help, but her breathing grew heavier the longer they walked. The relay came into view, nothing more than a scorched black needle protruding from a jagged outcrop. Around it, ice had begun to climb like a creeping parasite, choking the tower's base in brittle layers. Garen dropped to one knee beside the panel and popped it open. Circuits hissed at the sudden exposure to cold. He pulled out a small thermal coil, clamped it to the core unit, and began recalibrating the internal alignment. His fingers moved fast. He didn't like being exposed up here for long, not with Kaylena wounded, and not with that drone ping still echoing in his head. She stood a few meters off, watching the horizon. She hadn't said a word since they left. You always this quiet? He asked as he soldered a lead back into place. When I have nothing to say. You're a real joy in conversation. Kaylena tilted her head slightly. You think because I didn't shoot you, we're allies? I think you're here, he said. And that means you didn't try to kill me in my sleep. So that's either trust or exhaustion. She was quiet a moment longer. Then finally, you don't act like a soldier. He gave a humorless smile. That's because I stopped being one a long time ago. But you still think like one. He didn't reply. She took a step closer, boots crunching over the brittle crust of snow. Her gaze swept the horizon again, then dropped to the relay, to the tools in his hands, to the weapons at his belt. What made you stop? Garen hesitated. It doesn't go away, he said eventually. But there's a line you cross where you stop believing your orders matter more than the people you give them to. After that, you're just wearing the suit. Kaylena watched him for a long, silent breath. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than before. You lost someone. He looked up. So did I, she added. And then command said it was justified, collateral, a necessary sacrifice. She said the last part like it tasted wrong in her mouth. You believe them? He asked. No, she said. And that's why they sent the kill order. He stood slowly. The relay hummed, realigned and pulsing blue again. Their reflections wavered on the metal casing. That's why you're here, he said. Kaylena nodded. And why you're here too, I think. He didn't deny it. She stepped back just slightly and suddenly wavered. Her knee buckled. Garen caught her elbow out of reflex. Her muscles tightened beneath his grip, solid and tense like a coiled cable, but she didn't pull away. I'm fine, she muttered. Didn't say you weren't. Still, he held her for a second longer than necessary. Her arm stayed in his hand, light but burning. The contact wasn't just physical. It was something else, something that lingered, then passed like a breath in the cold. He let go. She stepped back, adjusting her coat, and neither of them spoke as they made their way back toward the dome. The airlock sealed behind them with a mechanical hiss, and warmth began to seep back into their skin. Garen tossed his coat aside and reset the power sequence on the generator. Kaylena stood near the wall, quiet, eyes unfocused. A faint chime echoed from the terminal. He turned, then froze. A red ping blinked on the relay grid. Someone or something was scanning the sector. Kaylena walked to the screen. Frequencies encrypted, its Dominion class. He nodded grimly. That drone you heard last night wasn't a traitor. Then they found my trail. No, Garen said. They found us. They stared at the blinking light for a moment. Kaylena exhaled sharply, like a blade being drawn. Then we don't have long. We've got time, Garen said. If we move carefully, if we're smart. She looked at him. You're staying in this with me? He met her gaze. If I wasn't, I would have let you die on the ice. Her jaw tightened. Something flickered behind her eyes, almost too fast to catch. She nodded once, then turned back toward the bunk. For the first time when she passed him, her shoulder brushed his, and she didn't recoil. Garen didn't move, not because he was afraid, but because just for a moment, he wasn't alone. The silence inside the dome was no longer uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that settled only between people who had seen each other at their worst, and stayed. Kaylena sat on the floor, her back resting against one of the curved steel supports of the dome wall. Her legs were stretched out in front of her, one knee bandaged, the other scarred. The lighting was dim, but it cast soft shadows across her blue skin, the faint silver veining beneath it catching the glow like starlight under ice. Garen moved quietly around the room, doing what he always did when tension simmered too close to the surface, busying himself with repairs. He wasn't fixing anything urgent, just rewiring a busted relay he'd already bypassed. It was more ritual than necessity, hands occupied, mind focused, past held at bay. Kaylena watched him, studying the slight lines at the corners of his eyes, the streaks of gray near his temples. He moved like someone who'd once known violence intimately, and now carried its weight with quiet dignity. You ever wonder what your life would have been like, she asked suddenly, if you'd never picked up a weapon? He didn't stop working, but his shoulders tensed slightly. Sometimes, he said, but then I remember. People like me never got a choice. We don't find the war, it finds us. She nodded slowly. It found me too, but I was built for it. He glanced at her, brow furrowing. She shifted, pulling her braid over her shoulder, fingers idly working one of the silver rings from the end. It clinked softly against the floor. You know I'm Virexi, but what that means to humans is always shallow. They see the skin, the reflexes, the tech interface ports, but not what's underneath. Garen sat down across from her, resting his arms on his knees. We were designed for precision, not genetically, not exactly. We evolved through bloodlines, centuries of selecting for memory retention, neuromuscular control, pattern-based learning, no family names, no parents, just cohorts, programs. Her voice was steady, almost cold. My earliest memory is of failing a logic drill. I was 4. I was made to stand in the ice vault for 21 minutes. They said it would teach me resilience. It did. But I stopped feeling anything after that. Garen didn't interrupt, didn't look away. Kaylena continued. I rose faster than most, not because I was better, though I was, but because I was silent. I followed orders, calculated everything. They called me a tactician, but what they meant was tool. And when did you stop following? Garen asked softly. RSV, she replied. You've heard of it. I have. Then you know the lie. He nodded. She took a slow breath. It wasn't a stronghold. It wasn't a military target. It was a refugee hub, mostly human. Some Virexi families too. Those who'd fled the Dominion's central control zones. We were told insurgents were hiding there. They weren't. Her jaw tightened. I requested confirmation. Delayed. They flagged me for insubordination, not to my face, quietly. A kill code was sent to my ship's onboard AI. I caught it just before execution. Manual override saved me, but not my squad. Half of them turned on me mid-extraction. Her voice faltered for the first time. I killed 3 of my own just to breathe. The dome felt colder. I fled. My ship was damaged. I ejected over Tarnis, not because it was strategic, but because it was nowhere. They wouldn't look for me in the bones of a forgotten war. And yet they did, Garen said quietly. She gave a bitter laugh. Dominion doesn't forget its ghosts. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Garen stood and crossed the room. He opened a worn locker, pulled something out, and returned with a data chip. He handed it to her. My record, Earth Coalition, Tyros Station. I kept the full after-action footage, unofficially. Kalena took it, running her thumb over the surface. What happened? Garen sat again, slower this time. I was a second command recon officer. Our orders were to neutralize a suspected traitor cell smuggling Dominion tech. Tyros was a civilian outpost, mining, repairs, storage. He looked past her as if watching the memory play out in front of him. But the intel was wrong. They weren't traitors, just refugees. A few engineers, 2 medics, a dozen kids. I raised the alarm, flagged the data mismatch. But by then, the breach had already started. Kalena didn't speak. They opened fire on the control room. I tried to stop them, used my override to shut down comms, but the damage was done. 14 people died. I was blamed for the delay, for questioning a direct chain order. They gave me 2 choices, dishonorable discharge or silence. And you chose exile. I chose peace, he said, but I didn't find it here. He looked at her. Not until you. Kalena's throat tightened, and for a moment she felt like she couldn't breathe. She hadn't expected the words. Not so plainly, not so sincerely. I don't know how to be anything else, she whispered. Not a soldier, not a fugitive, just someone. You don't have to know yet, Garen said. You just have to live long enough to figure it out. They sat close now, not touching, but the space between them had narrowed to a breath. Then a sharp ping from the wall console shattered the stillness. Both of them snapped to attention. Kalena moved first, crossing the dome in 2 quick strides and pulling up the scan. Her eyes narrowed. Heat bloom, 1 click west, not natural. Garen joined her, reading the data. Could be a scout drone, maybe more. They've circled back, looking for confirmation. Kalena turned toward the window. A faint glow shimmered against the snow in the far distance, small but moving. They'll be here by nightfall, she said. That's when extraction squads land. Garen already had his gear in hand. Then we move now. Use the ridge to mask our trail. If we time it right, we can draw them into the trench line. Kalena nodded. You sure you want to fight? No, he said, but I'm sure I don't want to run. A moment passed, and something shifted, not in the wind, not in the snow, but in the space between them. They weren't hiding anymore. Kalena looked at him, her voice soft. Then we do this together. Together, he said. She reached for his hand, not out of habit or instinct, but with purpose. And this time, when their fingers laced, it wasn't just for warmth. It was for war. It was for something worth saving. And somewhere beyond the clouds, high above the frozen world that had nearly buried them both, something unseen stirred, a signal traveling outward, faint but resolute, like a flare fired into darkness. They were no longer running. They were rising. Kalena didn't sleep that night. The generator hummed softly in the background, casting pulsing shadows against the dome's steel ribs. From her cot, she could just barely see Garen's outline in the dark, his back to her, motionless. But she knew he wasn't asleep either, not truly. What they'd shared in words, memories, wounds, names no longer spoken, had peeled something open, something neither of them knew how to close again. She shifted slightly, careful not to pull at her side. The brace was doing its job, but the pain lingered, dull, low, a reminder of what had nearly killed her, or who. Her thoughts drifted to the ping from earlier, the Dominion signal that had brushed their sky, just a whisper of contact. But enough. She knew what it meant. The hunt was close. She stood before dawn, pulling on her coat in the dim light and stepping outside without waking Garen. The cold struck immediately, biting, dry, sharp, but it cleared her head. Above her, the stars cut through the thin atmosphere like shards of glass. cold, distant, beautiful. She walked to the ridge and crouched low, brushing the frost from a slab of old industrial plating. From this angle, she could see the southern horizon and the flicker of artificial movement just beyond the old comms tower. One drone, too far to shoot, too low to ignore. They were mapping the terrain now, watching for patterns. That meant they had coordinates. That meant she had days, maybe less. Behind her, she heard footsteps crunching through snow. "You should be resting," Garen said, pulling his coat tighter as he came up beside her. Kaylena didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the distant glint. "I spotted them 20 minutes ago," she said. "Standard VLD paving. They're covering the grid section by section. They'll circle back here by sundown." "How many?" "One now, but if they're tracking heat signatures, the next wave won't be scouts, it'll be extractors." Garen was silent for a beat. Then he said, "We'll need to move." "We can't outrun them," Kaylena said. "Not with one working relay and no uplink to jam the scan." "I'm not suggesting we run." He turned to face her. "I'm suggesting we strike first." She looked at him then, finally. Her expression wasn't surprised, more like intrigued. "You're not the same man who dragged me out of the snow," she said. "No," Garen said. "I'm not." There was something different in him now. Not just the soldier she'd sensed under the surface, but the tactician. The part of him he'd buried deep, thinking it was the same thing as guilt. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was planning. They returned to the dome and started their work in silence. Garen pulled up terrain maps from old mining records, overlaying power lines and heat vents, checking for ambush zones. Kaylena began dismantling her ruined gauntlet, salvaging the micro-servo from its casing to rig into a proximity mine. Her fingers moved quickly, precisely. Every flick of her wrist held years of training. It wasn't until hours later, when the terminal beeped softly with a failed scan override, that Garen spoke again. "There's an old trench line west of here," he said, half collapsed, but the structure might still hold. "If we draw them in, we could set a charge on the roof supports." Kaylena nodded. "Bottleneck them. Give us one shot," he said. "That's all we'll get." She turned toward him. "What if I'm what they're after?" "You are," Garen said. "But helping you makes me a target too. If we split now, they'll kill me to get to you." "You don't owe me anything." "I know." He paused, then added, "But I'm still not letting them take you." For the first time in hours, her expression cracked, just slightly. A flicker of something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Gratitude. But deeper than that, trust. They worked through the night, building traps from salvage tech, rigging shock plates, setting heat decoys. Every system Garen had used to keep his dome running in silence was now being turned into a weapon. They took shifts, one sleeping, one standing watch. And by the second sunrise, the plan was set. Kaylena stood at the edge of the ridge, watching the sky darken. The drone returned just as expected, hovering low, scanning wide. Then it dipped, just slightly, and zipped off toward the trench. The bait had worked. She turned to Garen. "They'll follow that relay spike, maybe 2 squads, maybe 4. He nodded. "Then we stick to the plan." They moved together, wordless, the rhythm of motion now familiar. Garen carried the last of the charges, Kaylena covering his path with a makeshift rifle slung over her back. When they reached the trench, the air had changed, heavier. As if even the moon knew what was coming. They took position just as the first glint appeared on the horizon. Kaylena looked through the scope, adjusting slightly. 2 transports, 3 clicks out, low flight pattern, stealth design, their Dominion. Garen didn't flinch. "When they land, we wait. Let them step into the kill zone. They won't hesitate," she warned. "Neither will we." The moment hung between them. She looked at him, really looked. There was no armor left to strip away. No more lies, no more questions. She stepped forward, just a half step, and reached out. Her hand rested on his chest, fingers splayed over the worn fabric of his coat. His heart beat steady beneath her touch, strong, real. "I never thought I'd trust a human again," she said quietly. "I never thought I'd want to save anyone again," he replied. She leaned in, not a kiss, just contact, her forehead against his, a breath shared in the space between words. "Don't die today, Garen." "You either, Kaylena." Then she pulled back, eyes hard, spine straight, and the sky lit up with the scream of descending engines. War had come for them. But this time they were ready. The trench still smoked behind them, glowing faintly beneath the frozen sky, like the memory of a fire that refused to die. Kalena limped through the frost-crusted pass, her steps measured, eyes flicking across the horizon, not out of paranoia, but muscle memory, habits born of survival. Her rifle hung across her back, her coat was patched, and her side burned with every breath, but she kept moving. Beside her, Garen walked in silence. The cold wind bit through the seams of his jacket, dragging snow in sweeping arcs across the trail they'd carved down the western slope. His jaw was tight, his eyes tracking the ridgeline. They didn't speak, not because there was nothing to say, but because anything spoken might crack the fragile stillness that now hung between them. Behind them lay 9 bodies, a collapsed drone, and a message. They were not prey, not anymore. "We've got 2 hours before the next orbit ping," Kalena said. Her breath came out in a plume. "We need to be underground before then." "Subridge tunnel's less than a click," Garen answered. "If it's still stable, we can hold there through nightfall." She nodded, but her balance faltered. Just slightly. He reached out instinctively, an open hand, no pressure, no command. She didn't take it, but she didn't push it away either. They moved slower after that, but steadier. In the silence, Kalena's thoughts churned, not strategy, not escape routes or defense plans, but something more dangerous, memory, the way Garen had moved in the fight, deliberate, grounded, how he'd covered her without hesitation, how he'd stayed after the shooting stopped, not to check bodies, but to check her. She'd trusted him before she'd realized she had. The wind died down as they descended into the valley. The air grew still, the sky overhead darkening with heavy, unbroken clouds. Kalena slowed, scanning the outcrop ahead. She found it, a rust-worn access panel half buried in ice and snow. "This is it," she said. "Pre-collapse infrastructure, mining era, unmapped now." Garen cleared the snow from the keypad. It took him 3 tries to reroute the battery into the lock's memory coil. When it finally clicked open, the door groaned as if waking from a long sleep. They stepped into darkness. The tunnel stank of rust, oil, and long-decayed polymers. Emergency lights flickered to life, old filament strips, hazy amber. The ceiling was low, reinforced with carbon rebar that had held longer than anyone predicted. They moved quietly, boots echoing off the frozen metal floor, past broken carts and abandoned tool crates. It took them 15 minutes to reach the inner chamber. A bunker, oval-shaped, barely 10 meters wide, with cracked consoles lining the far wall and a collapsed ventilation shaft overhead. The air was thin, but breathable. It would do. Kalena dropped her gear without ceremony and sank onto one of the crates. She pulled off her gloves, flexing her stiff fingers in the half-light. Garen checked the perimeter, secured the access door, then crouched to set up a heat rod in the center of the room. For a while, the only sound was the low hiss of warming coils and the soft creak of metal settling. Then Garen said, "You were bleeding worse than you let on." Kalena didn't look at him. "Not enough to matter. You're pale." "I'm Virexi. This is my normal." He smirked. "Liar." That made her glance at him, just for a second, but she didn't smile. Not quite. "You don't have to pretend you're invincible anymore," he said, lowering himself onto the floor across from her. "You earned the right to bleed." She didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was lower. "I don't know how to stop." He waited. Kalena looked down at her hands, blue-tinted palms scarred by years of training, every line a story she'd never told. "You've made peace with what you lost." "I never did. I kept running so I wouldn't have to face the stillness, because I thought if I stopped, I'd fall apart." "You didn't fall apart." "Not yet." Her voice caught, just slightly, like something brittle held too long in the cold. He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "What if falling apart isn't failure? What if it's just being human?" "I'm not human," she whispered. "No," he said. "But you are something better." She looked at him, really looked, and for once she didn't brace herself against what she felt. She just breathed. "You never asked me to be anything else," she said. "I didn't have to." There was silence again, but not the kind that pressed. It unfolded between them like warmth in winter, cautious and slow. Kalena closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the hum of the power cell. Then she said, "Do you ever think about what comes next? After the war, after the missions, after all this?" Garen nodded. "Every day." "What do you see?" He tilted his head slightly. A quiet place, a roof that doesn't leak, somewhere no one looks at you like a threat or a tool, just a person. She opened her eyes. And who's there? He didn't answer immediately. Then softly, you. The word hung in the air between them like something fragile and electric. Kalena's breath caught again, but not from pain this time. I don't know how to build that place, she admitted. Then we build it together. He reached out, not for her hand this time, but for her face. His fingers brushed the line of her jaw, soft against the scar that curved beneath her cheekbone. She didn't flinch, didn't retreat. She leaned into the touch, and then, slowly, cautiously, closed the distance between them. It wasn't a desperate kiss, not born of adrenaline or fear. It was slow, deliberate, earned, a touch born of long nights, frostbitten silence, shared loss, and finally, something that felt like beginning. When they pulled apart, she didn't speak, neither did he. They didn't need to. Outside, the storm deepened, but inside the bunker, heat bloomed between them, not just from the power rod, but from the quiet, stubborn choice to live, to trust, to stay. Kalena lay beside him on the floor, resting her head against his shoulder. Her body finally relaxed, the tension melting from her limbs like ice given permission to thaw. She whispered into the dark, just before sleep claimed her. "Don't leave." "I won't," he said. And he meant it, not just for the night, but for every day after. Because love, for them, didn't come easy. It didn't come loud. It came in the stillness. In the war, they chose to stop fighting just long enough to breathe. It began with static, not a roar, not an explosion, just the quiet, rising crackle of interference brushing across their comm line, a faint tremor in the silence. Garen sat up instantly, one hand on his weapon, the other reaching for the receiver. Kalena was already awake, crouched near the console, eyes locked on the pulsing amber light. "Signal's back," she said. The beacon worked. Garen slid beside her. The scrambled transmission was low-grade, full of distortions, but it was real, and not Dominion. The code was old. Smuggler class, unregistered, no active bounties. It was exactly the kind of ship they needed. "They're coming down near the eastern shelf," Kalena confirmed, her fingers flying over the interface. 7 hours, if they make orbit clean. "Can we trust them?" She glanced at him. "Number. But they're not here to kill us. That's a good place to start." He nodded. They had one last shot. The bunker couldn't hold out much longer. Power was draining. Heat coils were sputtering. But the most dangerous threat wasn't the cold, or even the Dominion. It was doubt. They were fugitives in every registry, traitors in every system. Their names were erased, rewritten, buried. But they were still here, and they were not done yet. They moved quickly through the fractured landscape of Tarnis 4, an expanse of steel bones and frozen ash. With every step toward the extraction point, the weight of the past 7 days pressed down like gravity. They crossed fields of cracked ice lit by the dying sun, slipping between rusted antennae and buried transport tracks. Kalena led them through blind canyons and shadowed ridges, her breath sharp, her movements fluid now despite the wound. Garen watched her with quiet admiration. She didn't limp anymore. They reached the plateau by dusk. It overlooked the eastern crater, a flat expanse of wind-smooth snow broken only by the twisted husk of an old survey tower. Garen climbed to the top while Kalena set up the flare. Through the static in the wind, he saw it, a glint of movement in the clouds, sleek, angular, gliding like a ghost. "They're early," he called down. 2 minutes out." Kalena activated the thermal beacon. As the ship descended, its light scanned the plateau, cutting through the haze with precision. No logos, no identifiers. But it didn't fire, didn't hover like a predator. It landed soft, low, almost careful. The ramp lowered with a hiss. 2 figures emerged, humans lean and wary, wrapped in thick coats with matte face shields. Smugglers, as expected, guns visible but not raised. Kalena stepped forward, Garen at her side. Their posture was confident but measured. They had nothing left to bluff with, only truth. "You Kalena?" the taller smuggler asked, voice metallic through the mask. "Depends," she said. "You here for a bounty?" The smuggler chuckled. "If we were, we'd be aiming." She said nothing, watching him. "We picked up your burst from the relay ring. Paid off a few scans to keep it off the record. You got something worth trading?" "We have ourselves," Garen said, "and our silence." That made the smuggler pause. Then he nodded. "We're heading to the drift sprawl. No questions, no affiliations. You get one berth, that's it. Two, Kaylena corrected, stepping closer. The smuggler looked between them, then gave a slow shrug. Fine, but you owe us a favor, someday. Kaylena held out her hand. We'll pay it, in blood, if we have to. The smuggler clasped her arm in return. Board quick. This moon stinks of military. They moved fast, climbing the ramp as the wind screamed across the ridge. The ship sealed behind them with a metallic hiss, and for the first time in days, the sound of an engine, not a storm or a drone, rumbled through Kaylena's chest. She exhaled. They were airborne. Garen stood beside her, watching the icy terrain shrink beneath the viewport, the crater fading into white. The dome was gone, the bunker abandoned, but none of it mattered now. What do we do now? He asked quietly. Kaylena didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out a small flat data chip. The one Garen had given her in the dome days ago. His file. His truth. She slid it into the ship's console and typed a command in silence. What are you doing? He asked. Erasing us, she said. From every list that matters. Dominion, coalition, all of it. The screen blinked once, then flickered. Kaylena, we're not ghosts anymore, she said. We're not soldiers, fugitives, targets. We choose who we are now. Garen stared at her, then nodded. Not because he needed to agree, but because he already had. And as the ship left Tarnis 4 behind, vanishing into the void like a dream, they stood together at the viewport, side by side. They didn't need to speak. They had lived through war, betrayal, silence, cold, and fire. And now, finally, they were free. Not redeemed, not rewritten, just real. When the sun finally touched the dead moon's edge, it spilled gold over the snow like warmth, reclaiming a place long forgotten. The wind settled, the clouds parted. No one was left to witness it, but it didn't matter. Because for the first time in a long time, Kaylena wasn't running, Garen wasn't hiding. And the galaxy, wide and wild, stretched ahead of them, no longer something to fear, but something to shape, together. They didn't need a planet, they didn't need an army. They only needed this. A future made not from orders, but from choice. A path built not by war, but by trust. A place somewhere out there where no one had to flinch when they reached for warmth. And when spring finally came to Tarnis IV, it didn't matter that they weren't there to see it, because they had already started blooming somewhere else. The first morning without the cold was almost disorienting. Not because the sun had changed, it still rose soft and pale, casting long shadows across the metal floor of the ship's lower deck, but because for the first time in so long, there was no weight pressing down on her chest when she opened her eyes. No alarms, no signal warnings, no silent countdowns to the next escape. Kaylena lay still for a moment, listening. The ship hummed gently beneath her like a heartbeat. Somewhere overhead, engines purred in low cruise, steady and safe. She inhaled, and the air was warm, real. She turned her head. Garen was already awake beside her, one arm behind his head, eyes half closed in thought. He wasn't watching her, but the kind of not watching that meant he was fully aware she was there, as if her presence was a constant he'd already accepted. She shifted slightly, drawing the edge of the blanket up around her shoulders. You sleep? She asked, voice soft and husky from disuse. He smiled without looking at her. Didn't have to. Just rested. Kaylena let the quiet sit between them for a while. Then she said, We're not running anymore. No, he agreed. We're not. Outside the viewport, the stars drifted by in a slow arc. Endless, cold, beautiful. But they didn't look threatening anymore. They looked like possibility. Do you remember, she murmured, the first time we spoke without drawing weapons? He chuckled. Vaguely. You were bleeding, freezing, and ready to kill me with a broken chair leg. And you were arrogant enough to stand there and make stew. His laugh deepened. It was good stew. It was terrible, she said, but I hadn't tasted anything warm in weeks, so it was unforgettable. She sat up, the blanket falling to her waist. The loose shirt she wore was Garen's, a size too big, soft from wear. Her hair was loose now, the combat rings gone. She hadn't touched her weapons since they boarded the ship. She didn't need them anymore. Garen watched her, quiet admiration in his gaze. Then he reached out and touched her wrist gently. The contact was small, but it held everything. I keep waking up, he said, expecting it to be a dream, that you'll be gone, or I will. You're not, she said, leaning into his touch. I know, he replied, but I need to hear it from you. She hesitated, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she'd never said it before. Not in any way that mattered. She turned fully toward him, her knees brushing his, her hand finding its way to his chest, fingers spread over his heart. It wasn't the weapons, she said, or the traps, or the running. What wasn't? That saved me. She looked at him, eyes unblinking. It was you. He didn't speak, didn't smile. He just reached up slowly and brushed a strand of her red hair behind her ear. Then she said the words she never thought she'd say to a human, to anyone. I love you. Not like a warrior giving a report, not like a survivor counting the cost, like someone who had finally found shelter and wanted to stay. Garen inhaled slowly, as if the moment was something he could taste. Then he whispered, I love you too, and kissed her. It wasn't the first time their lips had met, but it was the first time without desperation, without danger looming behind the door. It was quiet, certain, and so deeply earned. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his and closed her eyes. So what now? She asked. He pulled her into his arms, wrapping the blanket around them both. Now we live. For how long? He kissed her temple. As long as we want. She smiled for real this time, and somewhere between stars, past battles, and the cold they'd both survived, they finally began. Not as fugitives, not as weapons, but as two souls who chose each other and chose to stay.